Welcome to Rising Parent, your go-to podcast for conquering math anxiety and unlocking your child's potential. I'm your host, Vanessa, and I'm here to help you navigate the tricky world of math education. But first, please subscribe to our podcast. It helps us to provide valuable content that will support you on your parenting journey. In this episode, Tim and Edna will be diving deep into the common causes of math struggles and share practical strategies to help your child overcome them. From building foundational knowledge to battling math anxiety, they've got you covered. So grab your favorite beverage and get ready to make math a fun and engaging experience for your little one.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're tackling a topic today that I think will resonate with a lot of you, helping our kids succeed in math, which we all know can be, well, a challenge sometimes.
Yeah.
But we're diving deep into some really interesting stuff today, a guide for parents, and some insights from education expert Annie Murphy-Paul. And one thing that really struck me right off the bat was this idea that math struggles are way more common than we might think. It's not always about a kid's natural ability, It's often about their confidence and how they view math itself.
It's amazing how much our perceptions, especially with something like math, can really influence how we perform. Like, if a child believes they're just bad at math, they're less likely to really engage with it, practice, or even think they can get better.
Totally. It becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to give you some practical tools, some strategies to help your child see math differently. Not as this big, scary thing, but as something they can totally handle.
I love that.
And maybe even enjoy along the way, right?
Absolutely. Shifting from fear to curiosity.
Exactly. And our guide for parents jumps right into this, why kids might be struggling with math. They break it down into three main reasons. First being those foundational building blocks, those core concepts they need to grasp before they can move on.
Which makes sense when you think about how math works,
Yes.
right? It builds on itself layer by layer. If a child is shaky on those fundamental concepts, it's like, well, imagine building a house on a foundation with cracks. It impacts everything else.
It's like those building blocks we give kids. You can't build a tower without a solid base. So how do we build that base? Well, that leads us to the second reason kids might struggle. And this one really hit home for me, math anxiety.
And what's surprising is how incredibly common it is. The guide mentioned that a whopping 93% of adults experience some degree of math anxiety. It's like an epidemic. And what's particularly interesting is how early it can actually start. Even young children pick up on those negative feelings towards math, often from the adults around them.
Wow, 93%. That's huge. It makes you realize how important it is for us as parents to be mindful of our own attitudes towards math.
Absolutely. Kids are always watching, always learning from us.
So we've got those foundational gaps, then this anxiety factor, and the third potential cause the guide talks about is learning difficulties, things like dyscalculia.
And this is where really understanding the root of the struggle is so crucial. It's not about slapping a label on a child, but about figuring out their unique needs so we can provide the right kind of support.
That makes a lot of sense because every child is different, right?
Yeah.
So let's say we are starting to see some signs that our child might be struggling with math. What should we be looking for? What are some of those signs?
Well, the guide gives some really relatable examples, like having a tough time connecting math to real-world situations. For instance, figuring out how much something costs or how to divide something equally.
You would think that connection to everyday life would actually make math more engaging for kids.
You'd think so, right? And Annie Murphy-Paul talks a lot about that in her work. She gives this great example of involving kids in things like checking the thermometer and reading the forecast. Instead of just telling them the temperature, make it interactive,
I love that. Turning everyday moments into learning opportunities. Okay, so that's one sign. What else?
The guide also mentions things like struggling to manage time, having difficulty explaining their thinking, or even relying on finger counting, even when they're ready for mental math. These aren't necessarily red flags in isolation, but they're things to be aware of.
Right, it's not about freaking out if we see them counting on their fingers every now and then. It's more about observing how they're approaching math and if there are any consistent patterns.
Exactly. It's all about gathering information and figuring out what kind of support might be helpful. And this is where it gets really interesting because both of our sources today actually offer some really creative solutions, like practical stuff that parents can use.
Okay, I like the sound of that.
So the Parent's Guide, for example, is all about making math, dare I say it, fun.
Okay, I am here for fun math. Tell me more.
Well, one thing they suggest is this idea of gamifying math. And we're not talking about complicated video games or anything, but even simple things like, let's say your kid loves building. You could have them build towers with blocks and use that to explore things like height, counting, even some basic geometry.
I love that, turning something they already enjoy into a little stealth math lesson.
Exactly. It's about sneaking it in there. And this actually connects really well with what Annie Murphy Paul talks about. She's a big advocate for weaving math into those everyday conversations, those everyday activities. Like instead of just telling your kid how much something costs at the store, you could ask them to help you calculate it or figure out if you have enough money.
Right. Make it relevant to their world.
Exactly. She also talks about using car rides, those long stretches where they're kind of trapped in the car with you. Use that time to talk about things like mileage or have them estimate how long it will take to get somewhere.
Okay, so we're finding those opportunities to make math fun, relatable. But let's get into some more, I don't know, like concrete strategies, because we can all use a little guidance in this department, am I right?
Oh, absolutely. And the guide actually stresses the importance of daily practice, even if it's just for 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be this big, long, drawn-out study session.
Consistency over intensity.
Exactly. Short bursts can make a huge difference over time. Now, another thing they emphasize is communication with your child's teacher.
Oh, that makes total sense. Teachers are on the front lines. They're going to have valuable insights.
Exactly. It's about working as a team. Parents can share what they're observing at home. Teachers can provide insights into the child's learning style. And then you can figure out a plan together.
And I love that idea of a tailored approach because, like we said, every kid is different.
Absolutely. It's finding what works for them. And this is something else the guide highlights that I think is so important but often overlooked. It's the power of our own attitudes as parents. They say that our own feelings towards math can actually directly impact our children.
Oh, 100%. It's like we're setting the tone, right? If we act like it's this big, scary thing, they're going to think it's a big, scary thing.
Exactly. Children pick up on those cues, even the subtle ones. So if we approach math with anxiety, with negativity, they're likely to internalize that. But if we can model a growth mindset, a willingness to learn, that can be so powerful.
It's like anything else. Our kids are watching us for cues on how to be in the world. And if they see us tackling math with confidence or at least a willingness to try, that speaks volumes. And you know what? Sometimes that's where we as parents might need to check ourselves.
Yeah, for sure.
Because if we want our kids to have a good relationship with math, a positive one, we have to model that ourselves.
Right. It's about showing them it's okay to not know everything, to make mistakes, ask for help. It's all part of the learning process.
It's like we're giving them permission to be curious.
Yeah.
You can make mistakes along the way.
Exactly. And that's so important for kids to see. Now, the guide also brings up tutoring, which I think can be a huge help for some kids.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Especially if they need that one-on-one attention or are really stuck on a particular concept.
Right. Because we can't be everything to everyone all the time. So having someone else who can provide that extra support can be so helpful.
Absolutely. And there are so many options out there now, like in-person tutoring, online tutoring. It's about finding what works for your child, for your family.
Totally. And if there's even a thought that, maybe a learning disability might be at play, the guide really emphasizes how important early intervention is.
Yes, that's a really good point. The sooner you can figure out if there are any learning differences, the sooner you can get your child the right support.
Because every kid learns differently, and there's no shame at all in needing a little extra help.
Absolutely not. It's about meeting them where they're at.
Okay, so we covered a lot of ground here today. We talked about why kids might struggle with math, what some of the signs are, and then all these great strategies for parents.
Yeah, it's been a really insightful conversation.
What are some of the big takeaways you hope listeners walk away with today?
I hope they feel empowered, honestly, knowing they have tools to help their child with math. It's about moving away from that fear and anxiety and towards curiosity, playfulness.
I love that. It's about fostering a love of learning, even if it's math.
Exactly. And the other big thing is how important it is for parents to be involved, not just as tutors, although that can be helpful, but as cheerleaders, guides, role models.
Couldn't agree more. Our kids are always watching us, learning from us. Now, before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a little something to think about, inspired by Annie Murphy Paul. She really got me thinking about those everyday moments, those unexpected opportunities to bring in a little math. So here's a question for you. What's one unexpected way you can bring math into your family's conversations this week? Maybe you're baking together and you talk about the measurements, or you're on a road trip and you figure out how many miles you'll be driving. Just have fun with it, be creative, see what sparks your child's interest. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, happy learning!